Did you know 5 of the Bayesian superyacht victims were found in the first cabin, that's crew quarters. Hannah was found in the third cabin, and the chef, as far as I know, was found outside the yacht.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Right now, 3 crew members of the Bayesian are officially under investigation. According to Sky News, Mr. Parker Eaton and Matthew Griffith, the lookout crew member on duty during the sinking, have been placed under investigation. Tim Parker Eaton was in charge of the engine room on the night of the sinking, so we're getting a little more additional detail here. Italian authorities have named the rest of the crew as T. Koopmans, Chief Officer from the Netherlands, Hutton Myint Kjor, boatswain from Burma, Sasha Murray, 29, Chief Stewardess from Ireland, Katja Chichen, Junior Hostess from Germany, Leah Randall, Third Stewardess on board from South Africa, and Leo Eppel, a 19-year-old sailor from either Spain or South Africa. It's strange that they haven't been able to confirm Antigua. You notice a pattern here. We also know the captain was from New Zealand and Eaton and Griffith were both from Great Britain. This means virtually everyone in the crew had a different nationality, not only in terms of one another, but in terms of the ship's passengers as well. What does this mean? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind, I also covered the Titan submersible tragedy in exhaustive detail, so if you're interested in this kind of analysis, you might want to go and have a look at that playlist. I'll put a link to that in the description. If you find this analysis worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So the name that stands out the most to me among the deceased is Mike Lynch. His family owned the yacht. It's strange that arguably one of the most important people on board, and yes, I know all lives are important, but it's interesting that Lynch himself lost his life. It's also interesting that Lynch was in the crew quarters, that's the first cabin, and yet wasn't able to kind of get out of the situation. You know, when the crew themselves vacated, didn't they take these people with them? And perhaps Lynch was trying to find the crew, except that they had left already. Now, the fact that you have 15 survivors, that's 2/3 of those on board, but not Lynch, and yet the captain and almost all of the crew survive, as well as a 1-year-old baby and its mother, that for me is very telling. The fact that a mother could save a helpless infant suggests each member of the crew ought to have been able to save at least one other adult on board. I mean, think about what goes into saving a helpless infant that can't swim. Now, the problem with the scenario is that once the power went out on board the boat, remember all of this happened really late at night, in the dark. You know, once the power went out, there was no way to communicate and no way to really see what is going on. Plus, your surroundings have sort of turned over on you. And then you've got that treacherous situation where, well, part of where you are treading is boat and the other part is water, and the boat is rapidly filling up with water. And so the ability to navigate below deck in the dark with water pouring in was likely suddenly extremely limited. But none of this negates providing an advance warning, and the captain of the other vessel, parked just 100 meters away, he seemed to be aware of the storm approaching at least 50 minutes before it hit. Not 15, 50, along with all of the local fishermen. Did you know not a single fisherman ventured out that morning because it was so obvious the bad weather that was headed their way? You know, you not only have the ability to look at the sky, but to listen to the weather reports, the local weather reports for that day. I also can't help seeing tremendous allegory in the 96 Everest disaster, and I've written a couple of books on that, especially the episode dealing with the infamous huddle on the South Col. We know that there were a bunch of people in tents in the South Col waiting out the storm in their tents. while their expedition mates were freezing to death outside on the South Col a few meters away. And I mean, just think of the symbolic visual symmetry here. You know, you've got someone in a life raft that's sort of like this red vehicle, but kind of looks like a tent, and they are all safe, 15 people safe in the tent of the life raft, while there are people in the first cabin, all together in the first cabin, not like they're all over the ship, and those people all went down with the ship and died. And so, you know, couldn't a little bit more have been done? In terms of the Everest disaster, in that scenario, you had one person, Anatoly Bokriev, the head guide of one expedition, who helped rescue several members of two rival expeditions. You know, he went beyond the call of duty. Did anyone of the crew here do that? You know, could you not have left the life raft and just gone back to the ship to see where everyone was? Did anyone do that? From the Everest narrative, we also know that Bokriev had to make an executive choice on who to leave behind. And in the end, that unfortunate soul was this woman, Yasuko Namba, a Japanese woman who spoke minimum English, but she was very light. Would have been easy to have kind of brought her along. She didn't weigh very much. And Bokriev later apologized to her husband for abandoning her. It's hard not to think that Yasuko was left for dead because she was less attached to the rest of her team. And so when things came unstuck in an emergency, that lack of connection really mattered. Didn't the same apply perhaps to the chef, who was, I think, found completely on his own, not even inside the ship? You know, did no one in the crew think of bringing him along? So one thing we'd want to explore here are the attachments between the crew and the crew themselves, but also between the crew and passengers in general. What were the connections between the crew and passengers, and also the survivors and the victims? The strongest connection, as we've seen, was between a mother and her child, this lady. And so we see that connections could have made the difference between life and death in this case. But there are also connections of duty in terms of a captain and his passengers, aren't there? Mike Lynch also had a daughter on board, but she died alone in a different quarter of the yacht. But in terms of the victims, one can understand that they were perhaps fast asleep. In this case, two couples died together, which means they could also have been rescued together. And so if you just rescued one member of one of those couples, you could have rescued both people, because the husband would have taken care of his wife. Does that make sense? Also, the fact that Lynch's wife Angela survived and was rescued, but not her husband or daughter, it kind of seems peculiar. It's another mystery surrounding what happened on this boat. Now, one could put all of this down just to random quirks of fate in an emergency, that when the chips were down, your survival depended on where you were on the boat. You know, if you were somewhere on the boat, perhaps on deck or closer to the deck, then that assured your odds of survival, and also the opposite. In other words, location. The further one was below deck at the time of the incident, the time of the lights going out, the time that the boat went on its side, the lower one's odds were of survival. So that's almost like the random thing of where you happen to be at a particular point in time. And you could say, well, that's not anyone's fault. But I'm not sure you can say that, because that presupposes not only that there was no warning, but that there was no possibility of giving a warning and no advanced knowledge, when we know the other captain and the other fishermen seem to be aware of what is going on, and certainly Borner was taking action. Now, if lack of connection is one possible explanation for things going to pot, another possibility is that there was too much connection, too much partying. And an article has just come out in the New York Post, Bayesian crew boozing to deal with yacht sinking tragedy at 4-star Sicily hotel. This is an excerpt from that article. The crew members who survived the sinking of the Bayesian yacht off Sicily have been staying at a seaside hotel and running up a hefty bar tab while trying to process the tragedy. 9 boat staff survived the ordeal, And then it says, the survivors, young guys, were having parties, even spending 2,500 euros, $2,770 a day just for drinking. If they were partying in the aftermath of the storm, weren't they partying in the run-up to it as well? And partying hard on the night of the storm as well? According to the article, the crew have been staying at the 4-star Domine Zagarella hotel in the town of Santa Flavia in the Palermo city district, while Italian investigators figure out what happened. So, as you can see, there are many variables in this case, many dynamics, many aspects to sort of integrate to figure out what really happened. I'm not going to take it further than that, except to say the friends of the skipper have told the Italian outlet Corriere that Cutfield had told them that he did everything he could to prevent the ship from sinking and to save the passengers on board. This could be true, but the question is, if he did everything he could, what did he do exactly? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.